for us to be able to have more discoveries in the country. In terms of the seismic acquisition, this is work that is being done outside the license, or some of them have been multi-client, some of them have been proprietary. For the last year, we have had PGS acquiring a seismic survey within Block 2813B. We have had PGS acquiring seismic within Block 2713. And we have Searcher, together with Shearwater, doing seismic that has been acquired in Block 2914 and 2814, which is the Kudu gas basin, or Kudu gas field. What this shows is that, therefore, once this seismic data has been interpreted, the shape and the nature of what we could possibly be able to produce in Namibia will just increase then exponentially. But in terms of the outlook, I told you, I gave you a caveat earlier that we do not predict the future, but at least in terms of services, we can be able to give you a little bit of a peek of the future in terms of what is coming. What we are expecting in 2024, this year still, we expect a well to be drilled by Chevron, we expect a well to be drilled by Rhino, and we expect additional appraisal wells that are going to come out of Total and out of Shell. We also expect some wells to be drilled by 2025, and within 2025, we therefore expect most of the work that will be done is the wells that will be drilled by Gulp in terms of their appraisal campaign, and additional well then resulting from the outcome of the wells that will be drilling by the end of the year, and hopefully even ECHO will come on board because they have a prospect that is matured that could possibly be able to reach final investment decision by 2025. So that's the outlook, ladies and gentlemen. It's for the service industry and the service providers to prepare yourself, and this is then where we say, when we ask a question, how do you play in terms of local content? The local content that we are looking for is therefore for you to be able to provide the services that are required to ensure that these activities or this work are done effectively, but with the participation of the local people. We're speaking from a point of where a country is highly demanded to meet the energy transition obligation. With that energy transition obligation, we should always have at the back of our mind that our oil and gas industry are coupled with energy generations that are prolific in terms of the nature of our land, but also that are contribution to a positive growth in terms of climatic condition. With this, we are always working in synergy, or we work with a plan in synergy for us to work the fossil fuel development in line or coupled with the green energy and the green energy transition that we are working for. So in all our plan, we as a ministry are busy drafting or forging forward to developing the field development plans for all the fields that we are producing. But our aim is to ensure that this production, once it starts, it will be done in line with us being sensitive to our carbon footprint as a country, but also sensitive to the contribution that we are making, and hence why we are working hand in hand with the renewable energy sector in terms of the energy production, with the green hydrogen, in terms of making sure that the infrastructure that we use yield value and provide a positive mileage for the industry, both on the fossil fuel production and also on the energy security of the country. With that, we have dedicated the town of Lüderitz to be the energy hub, not only the energy hub for Namibia, but the energy hub for Africa. And with this, it enables us then to be able to bring the fossil fuel that are coming from offshore, onshore into Namibia, be able to do value addition, and be able to generate products that are enabling the country to meet its obligation in terms of the Paris Agreement, in terms of the energy transition, and therefore the town of Lüderitz is going to be the hub for all these activities where we are meeting each other. With that being said, then going directly into the policy, what always comes up as a question is, what is local content? And this is a question usually that we answer to say that there is no specific definition, but a definition of local content should be a definition that the Namibian government, the Namibian people have set for ourselves. It should be, local content should be an opportunity that has been created or a means, a vehicle that has been created for the Namibian people to create forward and backward linkages of positive economic growth from the activities that are happening, be it within the fossil fuel, be it within the petroleum sector, or within the whole energy sphere, as we put it. So we don't have a universal set definition, but it is a definition that should be made by Namibia. But for us, for that definition to speak to us, it must be inclusive of development of the workforce. It must be inclusive of the provision of Namibian goods and services, on the utilization of Namibian goods and services. It should be inclusive of technologies transfer. It should be inclusive of financing, and it should, by all means, inclusive of the ownership in these assets. So when we speak of the petroleum, or especially the upstream petroleum sector, we're speaking of a sector that is highly specialized. It's a very high-risk industry. It's an industry that requires specific skills. It's an industry that is very capital-intensive. And it's also an industry that is technologically driven. With all these elements, for one to be able to participate meaningfully and for you to be able to have that definition of local content, then resulting in tangible result that you can see as Namibian citizens on the ground, you need to ensure that you meet these obligations and these requirements of the petroleum upstream sector. With that being said, we are therefore creating a policy or a tool that need to be governed, that need to be adopted, but it should also then provide a means for us to address these challenges or these inhibitors for one to participate, so that then we make a clear conduit for all to participate and all to benefit. In all, what we want to create an environment where investment thrives, and they thrive by being provided with efficient services that are coming from the ground. In a nutshell, that's what we are aiming at. The rationale for us is that after the discoveries, even before the discoveries, we have been trying to ensure that we grow a skill and we grow a sector within Namibia. And we therefore needed to have it enshrined in the law, because if you don't have it enshrined in the law, then it leaves a vacuum in terms of regulation. And when you have a vacuum in terms of regulation, there will be no implementation. And that's the reason why then a decision was made for us to make sure that we have a policy, not just a policy, but with its monitoring tool and with implementation mechanism clearly laid out so that everybody has their responsibility cleared. But what the current legislation already make provision for local content. However, we think that the prescription that are within the current Exploration and Production Act and the Model Petroleum Agreement, or the Petroleum Agreement, as has been signed with the license holders, are not as stringent and as robust enough to provide a clear guidelines. For example, if you are a service provider and you are outside the premises of this petroleum agreement, you wouldn't know what is contained in there, and you wouldn't know what's an obligation on you. It's therefore the reason why we stepped out of the current legal instrument for us then to be able to create the local content policy, so that then you have a clear dialect instrument that speaks directly to you. With this, we have also then needed to, for us to formulate the local content policy, we look at the development agenda of the nation, and that is what we are aiming to achieve. The local content policy is a tool for us then to attain the development agenda as has been set up in the nation. This is the tools, the provision or the requirement that are set out within the Vision 2030, the government agenda, within the Harambee Prosperity Plan, within the National Development Plans as we have them, and within the National Energy Policy. And with this instrument, they made a requirement or a call for all the industry to be able to contribute to the economic growth. Within then the local content policy, this is the answer for the petroleum industry for us to be able to heed to that call that is made through those national plans and goals. Within the policy, we have just a few, 5 policy objectives that we are aiming to achieve. We are aspiring or mandating the industry to ensure that we have identified specific sectors for the development of local capacities. Here we mean specific services that are dedicated to be performed within the local sphere. We are also speaking of maximizing the employment and development of Namibians. This is to ensure that the labor force that is required for this sector should not be sourced from anywhere else but from the local economy. We are also aspiring to maximize the participation of the local suppliers along the value chain. This is to say that all the services that can be and that will be provided for must come from the Namibian environment and from the Namibian service providers. Additionally, we are also encouraging or ensuring and obligating the transfer of technology, knowledge, and the skills. But for this to happen, for somebody to be able to transfer the knowledge and the skills, you must be ready to receive these skills and this knowledge. And this is the obligation then that comes from both parties. Those that have the skills and those that require the skills all need to come to party for this to be able to be met. And then finally, we are also then promoting the Namibian ownership and also ensuring that with the petroleum upstream industry being highly capital intensive, that there is financing mechanism that has been provided to enable you to play. Ladies and gentlemen, those are the objectives that we have set. And in order to achieve those objectives, we therefore then have institutional arrangements that we have put in place. For effective governance, the Ministry of Mines and Energy is an overarching body that is regulating the industry, but there is a commitment from the entire Namibian government to ensure that we have capacitated all the existing institutions for them to be able to play a part in implementing and in regulating also the sector. The key institutions that we have currently that are playing in the sector is, as I mentioned, is the Ministry of Mines and Energy, it's the Petro Fund, we have the Ministry of Environment in terms of safeguarding the environmental provisions that we have the National Planning Commission, we have the academic research and research institution that we have in the country, our national oil company, the private sector, civil society, the general community, even the media. We all have a role to play as institutions in our respective role to ensure, therefore, that the local content policy and the local content requirements are met with. With this in place, we have crafted a means and a mechanism for us to be able to monitor and evaluate the performance of the industry. We are not just leaving it out for self-policing or self-regulatory, but it's going to be a mandating action, not only mandating the license holder, but mandating to the last core of the provisioner of services so that we then ensure that there is room for all to participate, but there is also a means for everybody to be able to meet the obligation or the mandate as they have been set. In terms of the reporting, there will be a requirement, mandatory requirement for players to be able to inform the government or to have their local content or service or procurement plan approved by government before the work is done. And with that, then that will provide an opportunity for the government to look ahead and say, what are the services that are coming, and have local content being incorporated in the provisions of these services. We also have another requirement that we're going to have is In terms of us to attain the objective of the skills and the knowledge transfer, there has to be training and development mandatory requirement for all. A training and development metrics will be required of all service providers, not only the license holder, but all the service providers to be submitted and approved by the government. And a third layer of monitoring is therefore a succession plan. This industry, as we said, is highly specialized. So there will be involvement of expatriates within the industry to serve. But we also make it mandatory for Namibians to ensure that you learn and you get the skills from those expatriates so that there's not just a continuous provision of expat services, but for you to be able to take up that service. And one day, we also want to be the exporter of these skills elsewhere in the international market. With that, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, I therefore just want to urge all to take up your role in terms of your obligation as a player within the local content policy and within the local Namibian petroleum upstream industry. The obligation lies to those that are providing the service, and the obligation also lies to those that want to be actively participating for you to do what is required and for you to be able to meet the requirement as set out. The Ministry of Mines and Energy will be responsible for disseminating the information. We are also going to be responsible for administering, but we are also going to be responsible for taking care and guiding and guarding you in terms of the participation, whether it's just to communicate for you on what is required or whether to provide the help that the industry is needed. As I said at the beginning, the policies still have a window of opportunity open for you to provide the input. As a service provider, how do you want this policy to be drafted to enable you to provide the service that leaves a meaningful impact on the Namibian ground? As a Namibian citizen, how do you want the policy to read for it to provide you and to protect you and to give you that opportunity for you to provide the services that you want to help to grow the industry and grow the economy? Ladies and gentlemen, in a nutshell, that is what's contained within the local content policy, and I thank you. Thank you all.
You know, some of the conversations, of course, you want to keep it short and so forth, but because of the importance of the content that is being shared, we allow for that additional time for that conversation to continue. In terms of defining and unpacking the local content, it doesn't only deal with the oil and gas industry. As you know, that there are quite a number of other emerging industries in the country. The big conversation around green hydrogen, we know the head of state was here about 2 weeks ago to inaugurate the MetMast that was set up by Hyphen Hydrogen Energy to measure the wind potential in the region. Of course, the biggest MetMast measuring campaign to date, I think globally, they've set up about 10 of those at a cost of over 2 million euros. That's what we were informed about 2 weeks ago when the head of state was here. Now, they have a very, very interesting approach to local content, which they're terming, of course, socio-economic development, part of a framework that was included in the agreement with the government. But here to just give us an overview of that green hydrogen industry, socio-economic development framework, please welcome Mr. Joseph Mukwenda, who is from the Green Hydrogen Program in the Ministry of Mines and Energy. A round of applause for him, please.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Joseph Mukendwa. As introduced, I am with the Namibia Green Hydrogen Program. I'm one of the executives that were recently appointed, so you may have seen that in the local media. So the program has officially been operating for just over 2 months. It feels like a lifetime, I must say. It's been quite a lot of work, a lot of engagements, but it's been an exciting journey. I want to start off by just extending a thank you to the organizers for actually extending an invitation to us as the Green Hydrogen Program to come and speak at this platform. I think in many people's minds, green hydrogen and oil and gas cannot coexist. But in my mind, I think it just makes sense. I think in my mind, they serve two purposes. One is to create the energy that is required to fuel the economies. But secondly, it's about social economic development at the core of it. So it makes sense that we actually work together. I was just joking with Madam Shino here when we were talking about the national policy on petroleum local content, and I whispered in her ear to say, can we chat about having a policy on energy inclusively that can also look at accommodating green hydrogen, because that is something that we are also looking at. So we need to have a holistic approach, because essentially what we're trying to achieve at the end of the day is ensure that we create capacity and that we empower our people and that we make a difference in their livelihood. So it only makes sense that we actually work together in that regard. Seeing that it's a local content local content conference, it's about capacity building. So I intend to use this opportunity not only to speak about what we are thinking and what we're doing in the space of local content, but actually use this opportunity to educate you, provide you with some insights in terms of what the green hydrogen industry, what we are currently doing, and hopefully by the end of this session that you can also become advocates of what we're trying to achieve in as far as green hydrogen is concerned, not only in terms of its viability and the impact that it can create from an economic point of view, but really in terms of the impact it can create for our people on the ground. So with that said, this is essentially the overview of my presentation this morning. I will try and keep it as brief as possible, but also being informative. So I'll provide a bit of a background in terms of where green hydrogen comes from, the genesis thereof, and a bit of background and the vision around green hydrogen for the country. I'll speak a bit about green industrialization, which is a concept that we've coined and is something that has been driven by the Ministry of Industrialization and Trade, but I think it's important for the conversation that we're having today. And also talk a bit about local content best practice, what we've seen out there in as far as green hydrogen, but generally speaking, and a bit about our socio-economic development framework. My colleague, don't see him yet, Johannes Shipepe, I think, did a stellar job yesterday and spoke in detail in one of the master classes around what exactly Hyphen is doing in as far as the social economic development framework is concerned. So I'll touch a bit about that and then provide you in my concluding remarks what the Namibia Green Hydrogen Program is and what it's not. I engaged with some people over the last day or so, and people think it's a commission, that we are under the ministry, or we are under the Ministry of Mines and Energy. They're not sure if we're under the presidency, so we're hoping to shed a bit more light, and then I will also conclude. Okay, I think by way of introduction, and I think this is something that we all know of, there is a push towards decarbonization. That is where the world is actually moving towards. And in this regard, green hydrogen plays a crucial role in actually contributing to the global decarbonization efforts. And in so doing, as you'll imagine, the demand for green hydrogen and its derivatives is likely to actually soar going forward. Now, the challenge that we have in Namibia is that we are amongst some of the most climate vulnerable countries in the world. And it's a pity my colleague Johannes is not here. I actually meant to make fun of him and I. Just like our receding hairlines, what you see there on the map essentially is the receding of arable land. So essentially what research is actually showing is that by 2065, arable land, so if you look at, I think, south of Oshivarongo going down, essentially that land is not going to be able to cater for commercial agriculture. So we are definitely climate vulnerable. So in that regard, there is also increasing water scarcity that is impacting various sectors in the economic sphere. And however, the energy transition does provide us with an opportunity, particularly as Namibia, and it's a motivator for us to be able to actually push for green industrialization. We can then try and adopt new technologies for smarter agriculture, and then we can utilize sort of water desalination as a way to contribute towards providing water to the various economies as well. Now, it's not all doom and gloom, as I indicated. Namibia is endowed with world-class renewable resources. And what these two maps show are what they call capacity factors of wind and solar, so essentially the extent of the power. And you can see there that in terms of the percentage capacity factors, mostly around the coastal areas, is way above what you would find in Europe, and as far as offshore wind is concerned, where the average is sitting at around 36%. You can see that in the Kunene region is north of 56%, and here in the south where we are in the Karas, it varies between 47 and 58%. So from a wind perspective, we really have good quality, world-class resources. And equally from a solar perspective as well, you see on the right-hand side there that along the coast, again, we have really, really good solar, and that is way above the global average that is sitting between 10 and 25%. So it just makes sense for us to be able to take advantage of these resources. While we do that, we need to make sure that we take care of the environment. As you'll also appreciate, as you can see, where the best wind and the best solar is on the coastline, some of the most protected areas in Namibia. So we need to ensure that we take care of the environment while we take advantage of these opportunities. Now, the genesis of the Green Hydrogen Program, and I must commend our late president, Dr. Hage Geingob. He was the champion for the establishment of the green hydrogen industry, and it's enshrined in the Harambee Prosperity 2 Plan's economic advancement pillar, specifically around establishing the green hydrogen industry as a tool to industrialize, but also to be able to make a difference in Namibians and the populace at large. And research actually shows that green hydrogen could potentially accelerate Namibia's social economic development. It will contribute to, or is likely to contribute to Namibia's GDP. And estimates are that it's going to likely contribute 30% more than if green hydrogen was not included in the mix. And equally, and this is what we're discussing today, is around how is that going to contribute or support the man on the street. It's likely to create north of 600,000 jobs by 2040. Now, Vision 2030 has a number of targets that were set out that the green hydrogen industry also intends to contribute towards. One of the things that the country has been challenged with is that our economy has primarily been in the primary sector, and we need to be able to move into the secondary sector where we talk about manufacturing. And in that process, we need to be able to add value. And in value addition, that is where we can actually create the jobs that we need for our people. So what you see there on the left-hand side is really in terms of value addition. The target is to move from 15.8%, which is currently what the share of the secondary economic sector contributes to GDP, to move that to around 42%. So there are opportunities to try and do that. Job creation, very, very ambitious targets there to move from around 33% to about 2.3%. There's a lot of work that we'll have to do to be able to achieve this. And also when it comes to income distribution, Namibia is one of the most unequal societies in the world. If you look at the measurement, and as far as the Gini coefficient is concerned, we are ranked at, I think, second in the world, second to only South Africa. And in Namibia, you find that you only have a handful of people that actually control the majority of the economy. And we need to find a way to be able to distribute that income appropriately across various sectors of society. So that is the background still, and this is essentially the vision when it comes to green hydrogen. So it's not only happening here in the Karas region, so there are 3 valleys that are envisioned. So there is the Southern Valley, where we have Hyphen that is doing quite a lot of work, but we also have a Central Valley that encompasses the Irongo region as well as part of Commerce. We have a number of projects that are already running in that space. We've heard of the Daures. There is the Cleanergy project that is also running, among others, to name a few. And there's also aspirations to create a Northern Valley in the Kunene region where we can also take advantage of the resources that we have. So all of this vision is enshrined in our green hydrogen and derivative strategy that was launched about 2 years ago, and we are currently looking to implement. Now, there is a push for African integration. We're shifting geopolitics. There are opportunities for Namibia to be able to create even more value for our people. We know that there is a push towards deepening African trade. We know of the Agenda 2063, there is the African Continental Free Trade Area in terms of what it tries to achieve. That in itself provides for opportunities for us to try and take advantage of. And we know that industrialized nations are seeking for trade allies. So in that regard, this is essentially the emerging vision, as it were. It's around green industrialization. So we're not only talking about creating green hydrogen and its derivatives and exporting that, but how can we add value locally, and how can we actually connect with our neighbors? So it's around working with our neighbors to be able to deliver a new global gateway that creates modern trade, low carbon industrial opportunities, and placing the region at the center of the rapidly greening world. So you can imagine we have linkages then with our various neighbors, Botswana, Angola, Zambia, but it would mean that we need to ensure that the infrastructure is in place. And I think some of the things that come to mind, we need to make sure that our rail infrastructure is in place. Our road infrastructure is pretty good. We need to ensure that we can provide stable electricity, so power is important. And also our ports, there's been a lot of work done in that regard. We need to make sure that they are upgraded to be able to accommodate the volume that is going to be required in as far as export is actually concerned. So this is the broader vision, and what I can say at this stage is it's been championed by the Ministry of Industrialization and Trade. There is a comprehensive green industrialization blueprint that has been submitted to Cabinet for consideration, and it identifies key areas that we can actually prioritize, that we can focus on, and makes recommendations around how we can pair the mining sector, by example, with green hydrogen. We know we have a lot of rare earth minerals locally. We have lithium deposits locally. How can we ensure that together with the electricity, the power that we generate through green hydrogen and the derivatives, that we can actually marry the two to be able to add value, and then we export products where we've added value and we've created capacities locally. So that is the thinking. We are hopeful. Indications are that it's being tabled soon with Cabinet. Once that is approved, the details will definitely then be shared. But I just thought this was a good opportunity to just highlight the extent and the thinking in as far as green industrialization is concerned. And as you can imagine, with that, there are going to be quite a lot of opportunities. So bringing it back to local content, looked around, we did a bit of research in terms of what a local content policy framework would look like, and this is what we were able to find in terms of best practice out there. And it's not too different from what has actually been shared by various presenters yesterday. What was also highlighted by the Petroleum Commissioner earlier speaks to skills development, local manufacturing. This speaks to my previous slide as well, community engagement, as well as creating a regulatory environment. Technology transfer is important, and also ensuring that we have public-private partnerships. And then the monitoring and evaluation is going to be so key to ensure that the players in this space are actually doing what they're supposed to be doing. And maybe just to highlight, and as I said, I'm going to be very brief on this slide. My colleague Johannes actually did a stellar job yesterday and unpacked the social economic development framework that was designed or put together between the government of Namibia with Hyphen, with very specific targets and elements. That includes employment creation, how many Namibian jobs are going to be created, the local procurement, how we get the local MSMEs to participate in this, enterprise and supplier development, how do we support them to ensure that they have the capacity, supporting the supplementary infrastructure that is going to be required to accommodate all of this, CSI, working with the communities and making a difference in that space. I mentioned reporting, monitoring, and evaluation as key. And I left skills development for last, because that is something that has also been key to my heart, and it's something that we need to focus on. And we know that skills creation is a process. It takes time. So we need to have already started now to ensure that we have the skilled manpower that is actually going to be required to make a success of this. There has been research that has been carried out locally to just do an assessment of where we are as a country and where are likely the opportunities and the training programs that we need to provide for our people, be it at technical level, be it at master's level, and so forth. So on the right-hand side there, that is just one of the studies that was done with the support of GIZ on enhancing employability, and it makes certain recommendations around how we can ensure we're able to have the skills that are needed for particularly the green hydrogen sector. And one of the recommendations that I agree with is around creating a task force. There is no way you can talk about skills development as policymakers alone, as government alone. You need to bring in the private sector, you need to bring in the training institutions, you need to bring in civil society so that you can actually have a conversation around how do we ensure we address the skill shortages. Now, Hyphen has been putting together what their skills needs are going to be in the different phases. So are some of the other projects as well. And that input or those insights are going to be helpful for us to be able to craft strategies around how do we address skills development. Now, I know it's not a popular thing to say, but in the short term, we are going to have to import skills. This is a new area. It's new technologies that we did not develop. We are going to have to do that. But how do we do it sustainably in such a way that we are able to impart skills onto our people, or at least transfer the skills onto our people as well? But other strategies could also include reskilling some of our people, upskilling some of our people. I mean, I had a conversation yesterday with somebody around, at the core of it, if you look at the skills that we need and we will need in the green hydrogen sector and even in the oil and gas sector, there are synergies and there's an overlap in that regard. A welder at the core is a welder. An electrician at the core is an electrician. Yes, there are very specific nuances and specialized skills that they will need in that regard. So it definitely makes sense for us to be able to work together. So in terms of my concluding remarks, I just wanted to spend a few minutes just highlighting what the Namibia Green Hydrogen Program is. As I said, I've had some conversations with some people that thought we are a commission, we are under the presidency, but we've also been referred to as the Implementation Authority Program. I see that the slides are not up there. Apologies for that. But we've been established to foster socio-economic development by facilitating a conducive environment to catalyze the green industrialization of Namibia and regional economies. And for me, what's important is we are about facilitating and catalyzing. So this is why, as a Namibia Green Hydrogen Program, it's important that we have relationships established. We need to ensure that we're able to work with existing structures, various ministries and key players in advancing skills development, in advancing the Namibia Green Hydrogen Program, whatever the case may be. So for us, we'll actually be pushing and working very hard to ensure that we cement these relationships, because the only way we can achieve our aspirations is to actually work closely with various institutions. When we talk about skills development, the owners of that are the likes of your Ministry of Higher Education, Training and Innovation, your Ministry of Education, Namibia Training Authority. So you can imagine we need to ensure that we bring everybody to the table. We work within the Ministry of Mines and Energy. So when we had our meeting recently, with our ED, he was saying we are a de facto directorate under the Ministry of Mines and Energy, and we work closely with them to develop a strategic plan, specifically when it comes to green hydrogen. I'm also happy to share that the strategic plan for the Namibia Green Hydrogen Program has been developed and finalized and has been escalated to our principals for their review and approval. And we are hoping that once that is approved, we'll also share it with all our stakeholders. And this will be part of a comprehensive stakeholder engagement, marketing, and communication strategy. Because one thing we also recognize is that there's a lot that people don't understand about green hydrogen, and we need to be out there to educate the nation around what green hydrogen is and the potential it has and the impact that it can actually create. In concluding, I've mentioned the green hydrogen industrialization, or the green industrialization has a potential to provide opportunities for Namibians. Whilst there is no local content policy, legislation, or framework specifically for green hydrogen, there are so many examples of best practice. And I think really for me, I'm happy that I'm attending this forum and looking to learn from everybody who's in attendance and take your wisdom and your inputs and infuse that into any policy that we're going to put together. I mentioned earlier the social and economic development framework that we have in place. It can always be improved, so definitely looking forward to having more conversations around how we can make it more impactful. But one thing I want to highlight in as far as the green hydrogen space is concerned, it's a competition. We are not the only ones in Africa that are actually pushing this. There are other countries. So in Africa and internationally, collaboration is going to be so key amongst various stakeholders, public sector, private sector, and the likes. So business as usual is actually not going to work if we really want to be able to achieve our aspirations in as far as the green hydrogen sector is concerned and green industrialization more broadly. And then finally, yesterday when I was chatting with some people, I said, it is a great time to be in Namibia with all the oil finds and what is happening in the space of green hydrogen, but it's even better to be a Namibian. Now, what I realized coming to Ludritz, especially in this I was here a couple of weeks ago, I'm here this time around, accommodation is difficult to find, so there are opportunities there. But I'm fortunate enough, my wife was born here, she has family here, so they were saying, hey, listen, come, we'll accommodate you. And I think that was the best decision, because then it really hit home, I went and stayed in the location. And then you get to see the circumstances that our people are living under. So for me, when we talk about local content, it really, really is something that I've experienced, that I'm experiencing now. And you listen to their stories, some of the sad stories in terms of what they're experiencing. I was like, my goodness, we have work to do. So I want to just leave you with that as a parting note, but also want to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this morning.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, Joseph. Get me a wife, Chief. I also want a place to stay when I'm here. I'm not married yet, so maybe you and I during the lunch break can make some arrangements so that you can find me somebody here, because I'll also be coming here a lot now. Nonetheless, conversations, of course, around industrialization, particularly with the new industry, needs some best international practices as well. And I think it's always important for us to also learn from those that have already been doing it. Of course, we know there are a lot of good cases globally. Guyana is one of the big ones. But we are now joined by somebody from Trinidad and Tobago to just share with us some best practices and some of the potential risks that we need to look out for in terms of achieving local content policy objectives. And Mr. Anthony Paul, an expert on local content, is joining us now online from Trinidad and Tobago. Tony, can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear. Can you hear me?
Thank you very much. Good morning. The audience is yours.
Good morning. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. And if I can have the presentation up so I can speak to that. It's always a pleasure to be in Namibia, and this time virtually. I wish I were able to join you. So thanks a lot for having me. And let me just, if I can have the first slide up, please. I don't see it. In any case, what I want to talk about today is not in any way it's to congratulate you, Commissioner Shino, and the rest of those involved in the ministry, coming up with an excellent local content policy. I think you've done a great job of getting where you are. I've seen a lot of policies around the world. I've actually worked on a few. What I'm going to do today is not review, critique, or analyze the policy by any means, but rather give a sense of the general requirements for successful design and implementation of a local content policy. And that's based on my experience in multinational companies working in this space in different places and in a few different jurisdictions. It's meant, actually, the approach I'm taking is meant to challenge Namibia and Namibians to create a aspire for more in-country value. And I'll share a couple of slides to show what I mean by that. And to retain that value in country. The way I position the risks is not so much as saying this is the risk you face, it's rather asking some questions as to have you considered these things, or are you working on these things that will address the risks that underlie the approach to first designing the policy, which you've done, and then implementing it and making sure it succeeds. Given the time, of course, this is by no means meant to be exhaustive. So I can't see where we are in the presentation. So now I'm on the first slide, or the third slide actually. So I'm looking at the policy and its objectives. And again, those objectives are noble and actually exactly what you need to target. The questions that come to my mind when I see that, and thanks to Commissioner Shino earlier.
Tony, can you please share your screen? That's the only way we'll be able to see the presentation.
Yeah?
Can you share your screen? That's the only way we'll see the presentation.
Okay, I can do that, sure. I did not have a, so that's, I did,
Are you still there with us?
let me do this. And for try and I run. So open this.
Okay, I think we...
Okay, had no idea.
Okay,
where
let's do
was
this.
going.
Let's do this, Tony. I'll take you offline for now. Then I will call on the next speaker, and then we can sort that out and bring you back again. Is that fine? Thank you. I think we can release Tony for now so that we can just sort
That's
that out
great.
offline.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Tony, because I don't want anything to be lost in translation, and I really want the audience to also see the presentation here as well. So we're quickly just going to change the program and move on to the next speaker before we bring Tony back for his presentation, and just try to sort that out offline as well. The General Manager of Kaiso Energy Services, Mr. George de Moray, is here just to speak to us on that, and then, of course, after his presentation, we'll get back to Tony. Let's give him a warm round of applause, please. Thank you. That's your reference screen down there. Thank you.
Right. Good morning, everybody. My name is George Morais. I'm the General Manager of CAESO. I'm extremely happy to be here and to see that all of you made the effort to come to this conference. I will start by thanking Maria and her team and NCCI for putting this conference together. So we are going to have 7 points today. I'm going to jump right to it just because of time constraints. And this is the part where I'm supposed to tell you something to impress you about me so that you can actually pay attention to what I'm going to say. So as I said, my name is George Morais. I'm the General Manager of CAESO. I've been working in this industry for 20 years. I worked in many countries. I've seen the very cold, the very hot, and everything in between. And now I'm actually experimenting the very windy here in Ludwitz. So as I said, I worked for 20 years. I started in Schlumberger as a field engineer. So I was working on rigs, actually putting tools inside wells. And I went all the way up to account manager. Then I moved to another company called United Safety as a general manager for Angola, Congo, and South Africa. And then I joined CAESO. So this is about me, and let me talk a little bit about CAESO now. You, of course, know about Intel, about Hewlett-Packard, and about Google, and they brag that they started their company in a garage. We did better than that. We started in a veranda. Our first service was something very simple. We started by doing translations, and we started by preparing local content programs for international companies. So we started in a very humble way. Now let me share with you the story of CAESO with a video.
The story of CAESO is a journey of perseverance and success that we have experienced over a decade, filled with challenges and achievements. We entered the market by securing our first major contract in 2013. The following year, in 2014, we proved ourselves worthy of this ascent by winning our second large-scale contract. Not only did we survive, but we emerged stronger, ready to face any adversity in 2015. In 2016, we expanded our operations and acquired an even larger customer base. 2 years later, our resilience and expertise prevailed once again in 2018, despite the devaluation of the kwanza. 2019 marked a turning point when we optimized our operations and services. The constant evolution continued in 2021 when we strengthened our infrastructure. But the year 2022 marked a fundamental transformation for us, with new team members, a revitalized vision, and innovative offerings. Now, in 2023, we celebrate a decade of achievements, innovation, and energy optimization. Kaya Zo, 10 years optimizing your energies.
So, as you can see, Thank you. As you can see, we survived for 10 years in a world full of challenges and unknowns. And yes, the oil industry is full of challenges and unknowns. But let's try to demystify that. Did you know that Algeria started to commercialize their oil in 1956, Nigeria in 1958, and Angola in 1965? So this is at commercial levels, of course. Now, do you also know that all these countries are still producing today? This is an industry of 60+ years. So I've seen in many presentations that we're talking about 25 years, but it can go really beyond that. And this is important because you really need to understand that this is a long-term game. If Namibia starts to produce oil today, you can enjoy its benefits for a very long time. Now the question is, how will Namibians benefit from it? The usual response is through local content. Now, what is local content? Yesterday in the master classes, and even today, we all agree that local content has 4 main points. We have the exclusive service for local companies. We have exclusive jobs for local workers. We have exclusive purchases from local companies. And we have investment in country with special terms and conditions that benefit local companies. We can, for example, talk about ownership. The question is this enough? This is what we saw in most presentations. In Angola, we've been producing oil for more than 50 years. Today, the service industry represents $18 billion. From these $18 billion, how much do you think that local content benefits local contents? After 50 years in Angola, only 2%. So the fact that you have the policies in place, the fact that you list exactly what needs to be done, does not guarantee, after 50 years, that the country will have a proper local content that will benefit their people. So, there are many reasons for this. Some say that is lack of knowledge. Some say that is lack of skilled workforce. Some say that is lack of equipment. Some say that is lack of infrastructure. Some say that is lack of basic services. Some say that is lack of cash. Some say that is lack of trust based on your reputation or your experience. And the biggest one of all, corruption. And the result is 2%. How can we avoid this bleak scenario? How can we look at Namibia in 25 years from now and be proud of what was achieved? Well, first of all, we need to understand what is the work that needs to be done. We will do this by using our imagination. and travel a little bit in time. Let's imagine that we are in Q4 2024, after all the conferences related to oil and gas, after NLCC, after NIEC, and after any conference related to oil and gas. Let's imagine that there is a call for a meeting between the private sector and the public sector. And the objective of this meeting is to put in place a local content 25 steps growth plan. The main objective here is to select which sectors we will want to focus for the local content. 3 main sectors were identified. We have a first one, which is a non-specialized, non-oil field sector. And here, we already have a lot of Namibian jobs and business that operate in this sector. The second one is a non-oil and gas specialized sector. We also have some Namibian companies that operate at this level or in this sector. The third one is a specialized oil and gas sector. Now, fast travel 25 years from now. Same group of people meet again, and this time we can see a lot of smiles in their faces. We can see a very high energy in the room, and your president at that time starts his announcement. And he says, "My fellow citizens, I'm very proud to announce to you that we reached our local content 25 steps growth plan objectives. We managed to have local content presence at 80% for the non-specialized, non-oil field, 65% for the specialized non-oil field, and 20% for the specialized oil field. This has direct impact in our GDP. Today, we are a 25 billion country GDP compared to the 13 billion in 25 years ago, in 2025. Today, we are a $10,000 GDP per capita compared to $5,000 GDP per capita 25 years ago. Today, our unemployment rate is down to 5% compared to 20% 25 years ago. The numbers are debatable, of course, but the important thing here is that Namibia managed to protect its oil and gas sector and make sure that while doing it, it set very high standards. High standards, why? For those who don't know, your Namibian waters are very special. You have ultra deep water. Some of the discoveries that were done here were done with a water cut of 3,000 meters, 3 kilometers. So before you actually reach the seabed, you need to go through 3 kilometers of water. Once you reach the seabed, you need to go again for 3 kilometers of rock. And this type of operations in this type of environment are very difficult. It really requires high technology. And the role, I'm still talking about 25 years from now, the role of NAMCOR during these 25 years was key. Why? Because NAMCOR made sure that it was set at the table in every single block to acquire the necessary information to learn to manage the blocks, the fields, by themselves in an independent manner. And this is important. Why? It's important because it ensures the energy security of Namibia. And by learning how to manage these blocks and these fields independently by themselves during all these years, NAMCOR also ensured that this transfer of knowledge was done through the SMEs for the good of the Namibian companies. So NAMCOR managed to help to build skilled human capital, technical centers, solid infrastructures, local company champions, and a financial war chest. To do what? Now, Namibian companies are actually ready to operate in an open Africa and beyond. This is what could happen 25 years from now if the people in this room do the right thing. Now, yes, I am a dreamer. A lot of people told me this in the past. And I will continue to dream. How do we go from here to there? There is a very simple way to do it, but a very complicated formula to execute. You need to start by attracting foreign direct investment. And how do you attract foreign direct investment? You need assets. The asset that you have today that is attracting all these operators and foreign companies is oil. That's what is getting them to here. That's the main asset that you have. But if you only keep this asset at this stage, you will cap your level of progression and growth. So what you need to do is to add value in country through this asset. And once and how do you add value in country through this asset? You need to acquire new assets. And these new assets are mainly knowledge, equipment, infrastructure, sometimes merger and acquisition of other companies, or key alliances, and cash as well. To get those assets, you need foreign currency. I will go a little bit more into details for each one of these steps. To attract foreign direct investment, you need to remember one thing. You can't hide from your past. You can't hide from your history. So whatever you did in the past will define how much money you can get today. It's very important to have institutions that build trust, have good infrastructures, skilled workforce, and essential products and services. These are all things that Namibia have, but these are all things that can be improved as well. Moving forward, how do you add value in country? You need to identify the gaps. You need to see what are the services that require expats. Can you do the services in country without bringing expats? You need to identify what are the products that are being imported. You need to see what are the standards that are missing in country. And once you focus on the gaps, you will see the opportunities that lie ahead. Secure forex exchange. So this part is very important. This part is very important, and you need to remember one thing: stability is a must. In other countries in Africa, you don't have a stable currency. You don't have stable money. And all the efforts that you've done during these years to build your business can be wiped in a couple of months. In Angola, we had a depreciation of 20% in 1 month. We lost millions of dollars just because of that. So whatever you can do to stabilize your currency, you have to do it. Otherwise, you can lose a lot in very short time. So you need to control the inflation and the devaluation. You also need a very simple process to pay items abroad. Most of the equipment, most of the knowledge that you will need to be imported. You don't have it here. So if you don't have the right payments processes to get these services, it will be difficult for Namibia to grow. You also need a constant influx of foreign currency to support the local companies. If you don't have that, you will create a bottleneck as well. And all this is to create assets. There is one simple phrase that I always repeat myself. Money follow assets. If you want to get money, build assets. Build proper assets. We at CAESO, we use these simple steps to create our assets and start to get money. We started to acquire knowledge, then equipment, after infrastructure, after we start to think about buying businesses and putting together key alliances as well. And of course, that's an asset as well. And of course, cash. To be able to survive any upcoming crisis. As you saw at the beginning at our video, we survived 3 crises, 2015, 2018, 2020. If we didn't have a war cash chest, we would be under the water right now. So assets are important, and remember the phrase, money follow assets. Okay, so this is all very good. I share with you an image or a vision of a successful local content policy for Namibia 25 years from now. What could stop us to reach that objective? You have a couple of things here. Timing is key. While some of you are waiting to fully understand what is going on, what will happen, others are taking your place. Nature hates voids. If you don't fill it, someone else will. Don't wait. Act now. Team is very important. Most of you had speeches about training people, making sure that you build capacity. This is one thing that is truly important, but it's not the only thing. You need to remember that you already have local talent in Namibia. You have people that are very knowledgeable in what they do. And you need to remember the following. Either in the private sector or the public sector, if you don't take care of these people, they will leave for a better pay. And most likely, the better pay will be a big international company. So, while you're trying to develop your country, while you're trying to create a local content policy that benefits the Namibians, you will lose your best people if you don't take care of them, if you don't then anticipate this move. Ideas. Ideas are also important, but to get ideas, you need to have data. You need to have access to this data. And the best way to keep you away for this industry is to make sure that you don't have access to this data. So pay attention and make sure that you have access to the data. Seek for it. Look for it. Don't wait for people to give it to you. There are no free lunches in this world. And if you wait, the train will just pass. Business models. It's very important here that you focus. You don't try to do everything everywhere. Today, you have a couple of big companies in every single country. And all these big companies in these countries, one way or another, they were supported by the government or the private sector. And these big companies manage also to support smaller companies around them. What I'm trying to say here is create local champions. Choose the sectors where you want to operate and focus on 5, 10, 15 local champions. Don't try to do everything everywhere. And then funding. Funding here needs to be strategic. The people that will try to get money very fast in this field, in my opinion, will somehow fail. Right now, it's not really the time to eat the cake. It's the time to go to the kitchen and make sure that we can cook a bigger cake. This will require time. You'll need to put money on the table, and you will not get the benefits right now. You will need to be patient, and you'll need to make sure that you grow and that you create assets that are strong enough so that they can mature and can stand by themselves. I want you to retain 4 things from this presentation. First one, this is a long-term game. Therefore, it requires patience, it requires focus, and it requires resilience. 25 years from now, if people in this room take the right decisions, you can at least double your GDP. And I say at least double your GDP. 25 years from now, you should have 20% of business that are local content operating at the heart of the action, meaning specialized oil and gas sector. I heard in the master classes yesterday that this is hard, this is not possible, this is an area that is reserved for international big companies. I disagree. And I disagree because we are a proof of it. Last week, we had 3 operations going on in 3 different rigs in 2 different countries where we were putting with our technicians tools inside the wells of operators such as Total, Azul, Chevron, and so forth. So it is possible. You just need to focus and ignore the naysayers. Remember, timing is crucial, and the time is now. Welcome to the NLCC.
Thank you very much for that one. Of course, like we said, best practices from the neighbors, and I'm pretty sure we'll hear also from Nigeria a little bit later on as well, in as far as best practice is concerned. Do we have him on the line? Let's try one more time just to see. 100%. Tony, can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear. Can you hear me?
Thank you very much, Tony. I should just remind you, Tony, I'm giving you 15 minutes maximum, yes?
Thank you very much. That's very generous
100%.
of
So
you.
let's just keep an eye on the time. The audience is yours.
Okay. Sure. Thank you very much. And again, I apologize for that previous startup. Let me go straight into the presentation. And if I would, okay, great. So like I said, the objectives of the policy, what I will look at, simply to ask the question, you know, are you as Namibia, and the previous speaker kind of laid it up nicely for me, are you as Namibia aggressive enough or ambitious enough rather in terms of what you're doing and what you can do? And then I look at some of the requirements for achieving the objectives of a generic local content policy But I'll take that from the perspective of, someone who's worked in major multinational companies doing this in different places, looking at different countries and bringing together some of the lessons learned over those many years of doing that. This is by no means this is really meant to challenge, like I said, Namibia to capture more, and I like to call it in-country value. And I'll show you why in a bit. We tend to think a little bit bigger than that. And position the risks more as questions to be asked, rather than saying this is a risk analysis of the policy. And it's by no means meant to be exhaustive. So if I look at the objectives of the policy, I think they're great in terms of what they're trying to achieve. It's clear what they're saying. So I will ask the question, fine, is the policy laying up the framework for developing this and implementing this? And Commissioner Shino gave us a great expose on what's happening to get there. So I'm happy to see that. So one of the things I wanted people to be aware of is how, in fact, the oil and gas industry works and how oil and gas produced in countries like yours and mine. I am from Trinidad and Tobago. We have an industry that's over 100 years old. We've been refining for more than 100 years. We've been producing natural gas and converting it to fertilizers for more than 60 years now, and power. So we have an old oil and natural gas industry. But we understand from that how the industry works. And this graph in front of you is from a major multinational company that's all across the world in oil and gas. And they publish annually their sustainability reports and show how the revenue generated from the sale of oil, gas, and products is spent and is used. And as you can see, suppliers of third-party suppliers get over 80% of the revenue. In other words, oil and gas that you and I produce is sold, and the products are sold, and the suppliers benefit by 80%. Governments get 3%, just over 3% of that value. So I put this out there to keep in mind that is a lot of value, what third-party suppliers get. And that is why local content is so important. But the question is, are we targeting the revenue from local content or just the jobs? Because you can get jobs, but if you quantify jobs in the number of jobs rather than the value of the jobs, you might be missing a beat there. So if I look further at what this says to these companies, and this particular company was getting more than $250 billion a year in revenue, 70% of that came from the downstream. Point is that once oil and gas leaves your shores or leaves the fields, the value is almost 3 times more. Is your policy in upstream sufficient to capture the value that might be available downstream? And if this downstream activity is happening out of your country, how do you participate in that, or can you participate in that? And I put this up there to ask the question, are these worth going after? And if so, are your objectives and the approach to implementing them specific enough to target these sources of value? So let's give an example. So this is, and I won't go into the detail, but Namibia has a tax regime that includes royalty and taxes and additional profit taxes if companies are very profitable. What does that mean? It means for every $100 of revenue, suppliers get $80 or more. The government will take about $10.25, 10.25%, which is quite good, actually. However, if local content were to get 12.5% say of that supply chain, then you would actually more than double the government take. So that works out to like 15% of the total. So the idea is there's a lot of money to be made from local content. Is your strategy targeting value from a monetary perspective? And when I look at where this is aiming, so the goal of the policy is to develop competitive Namibian workforce and companies across the value chain and supporting NAMCO to become a world-class operator. That is perfect. I think that is very, very noble, and it should be what you should go after. The question I want you to consider is, in going after that, are you considering the scale and scope and the duration of the activities that will be happening in Namibia? are you factoring in the characteristics of what's happening? So in other words, Namibia has discovered oil and potentially a lot of natural gas. Is Namibia considering, for instance, a natural gas master plan to develop that gas? And how much of that in country, and how much of that can have local content and where? Procurement for major projects is a long-term endeavor. So you have to plan for it early on if you want to get local content. And local content only really comes when somebody locally is employed or a local company provides a goods or service. Now, we try to do local content by potentially giving locals some preferential treatment, for instance, saying you will use locals once they're available. But no matter what, no local can be employed or given a contract unless that local has the ability to deliver that. In other words, there must be the competency and the capacity to do it. How do you enable that in an industry that is new to your country? You must therefore invest in developing that. The question is, what capacity should you invest in? How many people should you train, for instance, as reservoir engineers in fabrication, in welding? How do you know who to build and how many and when they should be ready? And how do you know which ones to choose? So the key to that is a clear analysis of the demand and supply. And in addition to that, an analysis of your capacity, your ability to increase capacity to meet increasing demand. In other words, what are the institutional constructs in place for training and development? And any policy that gets into doing that must have good access to the information around the projects, starting with the geology and which discoveries have been made, which might be converted into developments, which will be converted into production, and what the potential is for going beyond that. That requires an understanding of the way oil companies work and having the skills to analyze along with them. And then once you've got that, we all want to get, as the policy says, maximize local content, maximize employment, maximize local goods and services. The reality is that not everybody can do all. So then how do you choose where to focus? How do you choose which are the most important to prioritize? And it goes through a process of analyzing what are all the skills and services and goods that this industry needs. What's the full spectrum? And of those, which ones should Namibia target? Because they align, as I've heard earlier, with Namibia's national development goals and the sector development goals. But more importantly, which of those will the investment that you make pay returns, which are, in other words, sustainable and viable? There are goods and services that are required for a short time. Maybe you may require big investment, which may not pay back. There's also a notion, and it's a reality, that the industry is high capital, high technology, high risk. But when you break it down, that high technology is only in parts of the sector, parts of the activities. The high capital is also in parts of the sector. And the risk is also on the investor in the upstream, meaning the operator or the contractor, and not the subcontractors. The subcontractors' risk is that the major companies doing this work doesn't pay them, or they don't deliver on their goods and services. So the risk profile is not the same for contractors as it is for the major investor. And that's where the policy comes in. A policy needs to consider these things to be adequate for implementation. It must have analyzed the demand and supply situation so you can prioritize where you want to go, and then setting in place the principles where the main stakeholders will play their role. And as we heard, no policy delivers itself. It must be delivered through certain regulatory framework and institutional framework. In other words, laws, licenses, contracts, regulations, and a raft of instruments that vary depending on the specific activity involved. And that must have an institutional framework, institutional with people with the capacity to make sure these are the right ones, they're working, and they're getting the results you wanted. So there are many stakeholders involved with different roles. There are stakeholders involved in capacity building, in financing local suppliers, and so on. So who is helping them understand their roles and what they need to develop and produce what is required of them? That requires a kind of coordination. And I'm happy to see that the ministry has taken charge of this and is driving this. And a coordination process is actually key to success of this local content policy. So in an attempt to stay within the time given, I've kind of summarized the risks with a focus on the institutional capacity required to deliver on the policy. And an important part really comes down to the institutional capacity in terms of what information agencies need, what competencies they need, how they work together. And coming out of that, or to drive that, is the appropriate control mechanisms. In other words, are they mandated, authorized to conduct their roles in the way they want? Now, people tend to think that a policy in some places, not here for sure, is sufficient. And that once you have a policy in place, you can convince the operators to play along. Now, if you're a realist, you know that investors and anybody seek their own interest. And if you think that negotiation of opposition is a good way to go, then ask yourself, have you got the capacity to out-negotiate the other party? And if you think so, then that's a good strategy. If you don't think so, then you probably want to do something that makes it easier for everybody. And that is creating, and I see this in the policy, clear and consistent legislation, regulations, and the things that go below that. So the things that go below that would be things like permits or guidelines. Those things only come about if you understand the activities involved. And that's where domain expertise is essential. For instance, we tend to think that local content starts when a tender comes out and locals are invited to bid. But if you wait until then, I can tell you from experience that is far too late. Major project design burns in the way procurement strategy and even the operational philosophy from the design stage. If the design stage does not consider local content and, importantly, local capacity development during those stages, then what you will get is what has been the tradition in old-fashioned oil and gas laws and contracts, which say you will use local goods and services, provided they meet international standards in cost and quality and timeliness. But guess what? If you're a new country, you will never be competitive in anything except the low levels goods and services. The previous speaker spoke about going to the higher level services, and he has shown that it's possible. So you must build in to your local content strategy mechanisms for capacity building at every stage. So for every tender that comes out, there will be a higher capacity in the domestic market. So you're building every time you go along. So your strategy has to have be designed with knowledge from how procurement works, line up with major project management, with how major companies manage their contractors and their contracts, and how they build human capability. So these are the things that institutions, whether it be the Ministry of Natural Resource, of Energy, the Mining Energy, NAMCOR, the universities, the technical schools, the banks. One of the things that causes local content to struggle in countries like ours, and I see from Commissioner Shino that some work is being done in that direction, is the ability to get competitive financing. Well, the thing is that our markets tend to have banks, who focus on debt and not so much a robust equity market. And one of the challenges our investors face is a lack of understanding of the risks involved. And it's important that in building out a local content strategy, we create a communication strategy that works towards helping others understand the risk. To de-risk some of the projects that are ongoing. So for instance, if an investor came in, a local investor, and said, I want to get involved in supplying vessels to service the offshore sector, the offshore facilities, the FPSOs or whatever you have, then that contract must be written in a way that meets the domestic market. In developed markets, the companies will go out for a tender for say a 3-month or a 6-month contract. No local will get a financing from a banker for that kind of contract. However, that demand may be there for 5 years, 10 years. Can there be a contract that has a 5-year timeline that is premised on performance? So the way companies procure goods and services is key. And that is something I think the government and the policy should aim to address. And I give those quick examples, short examples, to make sure that I hope I can get across in a timely manner. There's a lot to be gained from the oil and gas sector. And I hope that the policy goes beyond just the upstream to the whole sector, given the possibility of value there. And I want to leave you with this thought. It's important to get the base right and to grow beyond that. But it's also important to set your targets high enough that you have something to aspire to. And in the words of Michelangelo, if you aim high and fail, you're worse off if you aim low and meet your targets. I thank you for that, and I hope I kept within my time frame.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that one. Please, next time, use an African philosopher.
I have enough in my package. I'll use that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony. We really appreciate it, and you kept within the time that was allocated to you. Thank you so much. Another round of applause for Anthony Paul, local content expert, all the way from Trinidad and Tobago. There will, of course, be additional contributions from our international experts over the next 2 days. Now, we'll just make a brief change to the program. I know, of course, we're supposed to have a tea break, but I think I want to release you right in time for your lunch. So by a show of hands, if we can just continue, those that want to get a cup of tea can just step out, get the tea, come back in, and then we continue with the program. Is that fine with you? Thank you very much. Silence means consensus, they say, in Africa. Nonetheless, the second session for today is the responsibility of key stakeholders and the role of operators in implementing Namibia's local content. This session will, of course, have one presentation and then a panel discussion. But before we get to that session, I just want to open up the floor for question and answers on the presentations that were given now by the last 4 speakers. Do we have any takers? Do we have any questions, comments? Okay, we've got a hand there. The microphone will be brought to you right now. Do we have any more takers for questions? Okay, we only have one so far. Can you raise your hand once again for you to be identified? There we go. If you can please stand just for the benefit of the camera, your name and institution. Thank you, sir.
Yes, good morning, everyone. My name is Neville Ndongo, and I am a final year law student. Firstly, Mrs. Shino, this question is directed towards her. Thank you very much for the insightful presentation. My question is, one of the main goals of the draft local policy content is for Namibian companies to participate in a meaningful and substantial way across all areas of the value chain. This value chain including reconnaissance and exploration. My question basically is there a high level of local participation in these current exploration stages within Namibia? Not just in terms of non-specialized sectors such as catering, but rather in the specialized non-oil and gas sector, of course. Example, are there any Namibian companies currently carrying out geotechnical investigations or seismic data collection on behalf of these IOCs? Thank you.
Did you get that question, Shino? Do we have any other questions? Okay, we've got 2 more here. Comrade Commissioner, if I can maybe just ask you to come and join us on stage for that response. I see we've got 2 or 3 more questions still coming.
Hi, my name is Bertha, and my question is for Mr. George de Moraes from Caeso. And I'm just curious, there was a lot of growth that he detailed in 10 years. He spoke about surviving currency devaluations, and I'd just like to know how he secured his first client and how he raised financing instruments. So he just walked in. My question is for you, Mr. de Moraes.
Mr. Maris, you can just join us here on stage before you respond. I just want to get all the questions first. We have the third one there as well. Joseph?
Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm John A. from the Namibia Special Risk Insurance Association. Mine also goes to the Commissioner. I just wanted to understand how can we have access to the local content policy document so that we can just input our contribution as well. Thank you so much. Yeah.
That's a straightforward one there as well. Maybe we can take one more.
Yes, good morning.
Name and organization, please.
Martha Umaiti, Tridoc Shipyard, Namibia. Okay, this question is to the Commissioner in terms of the local content policy. Because we hear it's all about oil and gas right now, but then I appreciate what Joseph actually said, that we need to take a holistic approach when it comes to this local content policy. That it's not just for oil and gas, but then make it applicable to all other natural resources. And because that's the only way, because this should be a national agenda, not just oil and gas agenda, but then a national agenda to ensure that we cover it when it comes to mining, fishing, all other sectors. And that's the only way we're going to take this further than just a policy and make sure that it becomes a law. Because we're actually forgetting about what Mr. Advocate Shikongo stated yesterday. As long as it remains a policy, you will not be able to enforce. It will not become, so we need to push it towards, from policy, making sure that it comes to the place of becoming legislation. And from experience, when it's policies, believe me, stakeholders do not really adhere to policies that easily. But when it comes to legislation and it becomes an act, and that's really where we need to drive it towards. So what is the plan for, will you keep the monitoring and evaluation just with the Ministry of Mines and Energy? Or are we intending to make it also independent? Because we spoke about an independent organization, institution, ensuring that the monitoring and evaluation will happen there. But if it's only going to sit with Mines and Energy, then we're going to, I believe, this is not going to get anywhere else. So thank you. This is for the Commissioner just to then elaborate on that. What are you envisioning for this? Is it going to be just oil and gas, or are we going to take a holistic approach when it comes to this? Thank you.
Very, very important question. Perhaps, Comrade Commissioner, we start with that one and work our way backwards in terms of the responses.
Thank you. Thank you very much for those questions. Oh, is there one more?
Let's take these ones first, and then we can take the second round.
Okay. I think let me start with the last question, just so that our minds can work backward in terms of also for the information not to be lost. The current policy that we are designing, yes, it is stipulated and designed to serve the petroleum upstream sector. I think it's important for all to understand and acknowledge also that each and every sector is different. Although we're speaking of natural resources, although we're speaking of energy, there is some differences that comes within the industry or that comes from the industry when it comes to the specific application and implementation of a policy. What we are aiming at is that this is the first time that Namibia is designing a document that aim at ensuring economic growth from a certain industry without necessarily waiting just for the tax and revenues that are coming from it. So what we want to do is, we are going to design and adopt the local content policy for the petroleum upstream sector, but it's going to be an exemplar and a template for all other sectors then to implement in terms of applying them and just making them fit for purpose so that it can be applied still to the mining sector. It can be applied even to the petroleum downstream sector. Is a different skill sets that are required, or specification, and then going further up to the mining sector and everywhere in terms of even the fisheries and every sector that way it will be required. However, what I want you to be aware of also is that what we are designing currently is just a policy, but this policy does not stand alone. If we make it stand alone, we will not be able to achieve anything that we are aiming at achieving. We are designing a policy that have the monitoring tools, and together with the monitoring tool, it's still not sufficient. We are also busy drafting, once a policy is adopted, we are also busy drafting regulations that are then going to be the specific responses or the specific policy or laws that make it mandatory for the license holders and the service providers and everybody to oblige to. So there will be a set of regulations, but this regulation, and that's where the differences comes into the specific sectors. Each and every requirement that are set in must be crafted depending on the needs of the industry that you are serving. Petroleum upstream is different from mining. We have to be cognizant of that. But this gives an example for the overall Namibian government to be able to set the pace so that then we can do this for all sectors. If that's what we want, that is what we should do as a country. Now, there was a question in terms of where can the local content policy be found. We have it uploaded on the ministry's website. It's available, but you can also reach out to us. You can send an email to us. We also have a booth or a corner upstairs where you can just drop your emails on a register, and we will be able to share the digital version of the policy for you right here where we are. In terms of a second question that was asked is whether currently there are Namibians who are already serving in the sphere of petroleum. Yes, we have. We have companies like Risk-Based Solution. They provide the special services of conducting environmental impact assessment. We have Pioneers Consultancy. They are here in the room. They provide the technical expertise and they provide exploration programs on behalf of these IOCs. We have companies like NAMDOC, the Namibian. They are the ones who are providing the services and serving this industry. I think most of you have been in Walvis Bay. You have seen a number of rigs that are parked there. They are coming there because they are coming to get serviced by Namibian companies in Namibia. And we have many technical, highly specialized companies that are offering services, so it is possible. Unfortunately, those are the three that could come to mind right now, but there are many that are available.
George?
Yes, so I'm not sure if I remember the full question, but the part that I remember is how did we acquire our first client? Is that right?
How did you get financing for starting up?
Okay.
Corporate financing.
So I will start with how did you get finance for starting up?
Yeah.
So two sources. I worked for many years for Schlumberger, and I managed to put some money on the side. So that's one. But that's not enough. So there is one concept that you need to understand, which is work with other people's money. And to work with other people's money, you need to build enough trust and enough experience so that people can hand you the money that you need to grow your business. So first thing is build a good reputation, learn one particular craft, be very good at it, so that people feel comfortable to give you the money necessary to do whatever you, the presentation. There was one part of the presentation where I said that you need to focus on the gaps. And there is a very good book that talks about that. It's called Blue Oceans. I don't know if you're familiar with it. But the difference between blue oceans and red oceans is that red oceans are the markets where there are a lot of competitors that sell exactly the same thing. And you'll need to fight with them, and you'll need to lower your price to win your business. If you enter those markets at the same conditions as everybody else, you will most likely work a lot for very little. So you need to create your own blue ocean, which means that you need to find a niche that the client needs, that nobody is providing, that nobody is on right now. And that's exactly what we did. We identified niches where we would not go into competition with the Schlumberger, the Bakers, the Halliburtons, and we did something that the client needed and that was complementary to what the big international companies needed. So focus on the gaps.
100%. So we'll take that one question. Are there any more takers in terms of questions for this round? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so we'll take those 4 questions and then we close the session. And I would like to say, for the conference, please, as part of a standard operating procedure, when I ask for the first time for questions, please be the first to show up, not only after 1 or 2 people have asked, or everybody gets the emphasis to ask the question, but please, for next time, let's be quick with the questions as well. Doc?
Okay. Thank you, Ricardo, and thank you for the presenters. I think, Commissioner, thank you for the answer, but the presenter yesterday, I think is Mr. Shikongo. He said the local content should really speak to all other sectors. And of course, you are particular to talk about the petroleum sectors. But what we want is, we don't see situation analysis. Why is it not working now in these other sectors? He made reference to fisheries. Of course, there are other sectors in critical minerals. So can you at least provide us what was the situation analysis that informs the current draft? Straight one is to Kaeso. You spoke on forex. What was the program that you implemented, maybe as a sovereign, to raise the forex? Because you say you must provide the forex. Who did it? What was the agency? Is it central bank? Is it government? And which jurisdictions will you refer us to look at? Tony, on the risk for capacity, what will you advise available documents on how to de-risk the capacity that we probably foresee here in Namibia, having green hydrogen that will require human capacity, with oil developing at the same time? I don't know whether you have engineers or mechanical engineers that will be left to work for government, and that's something that we want to avoid. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Before you sit down, the doctor is from the Bank of Namibia. I understand the monetary policy was announced now. Do we have good news or bad news, Doc? You have the microphone, no?
No points. Otherwise, I'll be chased out here.
All right, thank you. We can start with the responses.
No, thank you. I think the question that was asked is whether we have done a situation analysis, and if that situation analysis is the one that informed the policy. The answer would be no. We didn't do a local situation analysis because there was no need. What informed the policy, the current draft of the policy, is the industry practice. How has other jurisdictions, other countries where oil is being produced, how are they realizing the benefit of their production, of their resources, and what have those countries done to ensure that they maximized the benefit that come to them? The main example usually that we use is, you look at African producing nations. They are wallowing in poverty while they have a maximum of wealth that is extracted, that is going out of their nation without leaving any meaningful value to their country. We looked at those countries and we say that We would want Namibia to be different, but in order to be different, you don't only need to have an excellent fiscal regime, you also need to double your value. Tony just made an example to say that if your government take is 10% and you have an effective local content policy, you can be able to double or even triple that government take. And that's the approach that we have taken to say, you look at countries like Norway, they started as a fishing jurisdiction. They started the production. When they did the production, they converted almost all their skills that they have in a shipyard, in fishing, to be able to provide the services to the industry. Right now, as we sit here, Norway is self-reliant. They are able to capture any level, any value addition from that industry, and that's why they have a sector that is thriving. Our aim, our objective is to look at what other countries have done, for us to pick the best examples, and to also note of the pitfalls that they've fallen, so that we ensure that we are not there. And hence, the design of our policies is in the current format because we have looked at what others have done, those that pioneered before us.
Yes, George?
Yes, so regarding the forex, so as a company, there's not much that we can really do. We depend on the central banks, but let me get a little bit more on details on that. To control the inflation or the devalorizations, one of the things that you need to do is to control your foreign reserves. And to control your foreign reserves, theoretically, you need to export more than you import, so that you get more foreign currency in your central bank than you actually spend. The other thing that you need also to control the inflation is to make sure that you find means to produce enough goods in country so that you can stabilize your economy. One of the things that I see in Namibia that need, I think, to be balanced is that you have a lot of difference between the regions. You have Windhoek, that has a certain level of economy. You have Ludritz, that is a little bit left behind. You have Walvis Bay, that also has a certain level of economy. And then you have the north. So somehow you need to stabilize that and to homogenize that just to make sure that you don't have a lot of differences. There will be a big influx of money coming in this country. And if you're not careful with that, there will be the gap between the ones that have and don't have will increase even more. For example, in Angola, we don't have a very good control of foreign reserves. And that's problematic for companies like ours for a very simple reason. When we need to pay for equipment abroad, we have kwanzas in our banks in Angola that we cannot exchange. That will take a lot of time to transfer abroad, when the transfer is possible. So you end up in a situation where you cannot buy equipment for your business. So you lose opportunities. So how do you avoid that? One of the things that many companies do is that they set up a company abroad and they ask for the operators to pay you directly abroad. What are the consequences of this? You take money out of your country as a local company. So you need to avoid this type of scenario through different policies that need to be applied by, I guess, your Bank of Namibia and the concerned ministries. So it's not an easy thing to do, but it's something that you need to keep in mind and that you need definitely to prepare for. Because the influx of money will come. And if we're not ready for it, there will be this imbalance.
Yeah, but George, maybe it must come so we can figure it out while the money is there. Okay, the money is here now. What do we do next? Thank you very much for the contribution. I think at this stage I will just cut the questions for now. We are still together here. There are other avenues in terms of how we can engage, and there will, of course, be plenty of time during the networking sessions. Just please give a warm round of applause to our session speakers. Thank you very much. It's time now for our second session. This one will run for about an hour and 15 minutes, just in time for lunch. We only have one presentation, and that assists us, of course, with that time as well. You want me to call the speakers back again? These are CEOs. I can't keep calling them up and down. Can you just come back one more time just for that group picture before you step off? Thank you. You know, you just heard Joseph is a new executive, so we don't want to chase him around so much as well. Thank you very much for being such a great sport. Thank you so much. There we have it, Joseph. You've got the first one, first official one you can put in the office, eh? All righty. Now, the second session will look at the responsibility of key stakeholders and the role of operators in the implementation of the Namibian local content, particularly what is the responsibility of government institutions and the operators. And I'd like to call on Ms. Rachel Msiska, the Wogan chairperson, and AMPOA's Secretary General to come and lead her session. Please give her a warm round of applause.
Thank you, Master of Ceremony. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Rachel Namata Msiska, and it is my esteemed honor to welcome you to this pivotal session focused on enhancing Namibian participation in the oil and gas industry through effective local content strategies. Recognizing the critical importance of collaboration and coordination among key stakeholders, and as we've just heard from the Petroleum Commissioner, I'm sad she's just left, the Namibian government has underscored the need for concerted efforts to increase local content or local involvement, rather, in value addition with this vital sector. Today we gather with a shared commitment to exploring the various roles and responsibilities of key stakeholders in fostering an environment conducive to local participation and development. This session will discuss the various roles and responsibilities of different key stakeholders with regards to local content for oil and gas sector as a driver for economic growth. The role of local content in the supply and value chain, joint venture collaboration both locally and internationally, and bridging the capacity group. The intersection between these factors and the promotion of the role and responsibility of Namibian local content providers is imperative for the sustainable socio-economic development of Namibia. With that brief introduction, I'd like to call on my panelists, introducing a seasoned leader in both government agencies and private companies across various industries, non-executive member and founder of the Hangala Group, my favorite senior citizen, Dr. Liake Hangala.
Thank you very much. How does this work? Okay. Very good. Thank you very much. I'm very honored to be here, and I will talk about government institutions and operators' role in implementing local content. Of course, naturally, the first thing is to have a common objective. And these objectives has been stated and restated. I just say a few of them. Number one is to prioritize the Namibian nationals and companies in the procurement of goods and services for local content. For the sake of clarity, when I say Namibian, I mean Namibian, black or white. There is a feeling in Namibia that, that our white compatriots are rich. No, they are quite poor. There are not many white Namibians who own fishing quarters, who own mines, who own, critical assets. Some of them, before independence, they owned farms, and they were not necessarily farmed in the most modern way. So therefore, we talk all Namibians. It's also important that we define when we say Namibian companies. In some jurisdiction, like in Guyana, a national company is defined with certain percentage, that the company that is owned by so many Namibians and employs so many Namibians. Otherwise, you will get companies registered here and try to operate as Namibians, but they are not owned by Namibians. They are there to be a conduit of money come from here, but also to facilitate local development, to ensure that the benefit derived from oil and gas development reach all Namibians. Of course, to create employment. Globally, this issue of unemployment is becoming very slippery. There are very, very few countries who are controlling it. Maybe I see United States of America, they are at 5%. You have countries like Norway at 5%. But globally, that's a big problem. But also to develop Namibia entrepreneurs, businessmen and women, and to create wealth for the country and citizens. So the role of government, and Maggie has stated very clearly, is number one, to come up and adopt clear local content policy. But this policy must move to legislation. They must become laws. To also ensure that operators deliver annual plans for implementation of those policies by themselves. Most of the problem in Namibia in our society do lost in administration and implementation. It's important for government to put up administrative bodies that are efficient and that deliver timely. In Guyana, there is also clear targets where local individuals and companies should participate, and the target of those sectors. Government must also put up measures that ensures that the safety, health, and environmental standards are not compromised during implementation. The role of operators is to comply with the laws and the regulations in the implementation of the local content policy, to ensure that they indeed submit annual content policies and plans. They should also bring to the country like Namibia best international practices. They operate all over the world. Naturally, and Maggie stated it, to transfer technology, knowledge, and skills. It's also important that international operators take Namibians and expose them globally in their operations offshore. Most of unethical behavior also are being brought by foreign companies. So it's important that the operators conduct themselves in the most ethical manner. In this business, you need partners. So it's also important that operators help to hand-holding, identify partners. They have global partners that supply services, let's say in Seismic, in all that's required. They can bring those operators globally and put them together with Namibians. The most challenging thing in Namibia, and I have experienced it in my life, is access to financing. Most of Namibians' generations, or most of you who are sitting here, you are the first businessmen and women in your families. You have no assets. So we must find an innovative and creative way to bring capital. This is a very capital-intensive industry. So operators should also help. Sometimes banks help a lot. If I say I have a 5-year contract from Shell or 5-year contract from Total, or if you have a relationship that you pay your share of your dividends, and therefore international or operators must help Namibians to get access to capital. It's very, very difficult to get capital in a country like Namibia. What are the criteria of success in the local content? Number one, to me, is a clear and transparent policies and the registration. It must be very clear. And I am very impressed by the registration of Guyana. It's very clear, very simple as well. There must also be a clear communication. We need, or government need to be open to communicate and not to take citizens by surprise. Administrative efficiency. We have so many policies, some of them so good, but they all die with implementation. So it's also important that we put up proper administrative institutions that are efficient and that deliver on time. Policies must also move times. If we don't change, they will die. There must also be a clear balance between the interest of state, interest of Namibians, in the interest of international investors. Also, make sure that whatever policy we put up, it creates value, does not destroy value. Business is profit. If our policies in Namibia does not or do not generate profit for investors, forget it. They will not come here. So we must also put up policies and practice that ensure that they deliver profit, a reasonable profit, of course. Our colleague from Angola talked about a very good policy in Angola, good local content, but the benefit is only 2%. And he said the elephant in the room is this thing called corruption. So how do we make sure that corruption does not become that inherent problem that make Namibia local content policy not to succeed? One of it, of course, is to have a very vigorous and investigative press that report these things. And I was very happy to listen to our colleague from Nampa yesterday, that they want also to be involved. And also active citizens. But I think corruption is a thing that we must fight. Of course, we can talk about local content in the oil and gas industry. I think we must try to avoid to build an economy that's based on one commodity. Today, the oil price is, when I looked 5 minutes ago, was $89. 2 weeks ago, it was 70. Because of the problem in the Middle East, it went up a little bit. So we've seen oil countries that ruined the economy because it was only based on one commodity. So we must try to build an economy that's diversified, that has a very good balance between economy based on commodity and economy based on services. China had a policy that their Communist Party passed about 2 years ago, that they want that 25% of the economy is based on services, service sector. So, therefore, it's very important that we do not only build an economy that is based on one commodity. This commodity, oil and gas, is controlled somewhere. It's very rough. And we will be one of those small players. I also believe, like somebody said, therefore, that we must develop local content policy for other sectors of our economy. For mining, for financial services, for retail. We have been 34 years independent as a country. There is not major Namibian-owned retail company except Woermann Block. Those that were in the north, they were destroyed by big companies. The good thing of retail company is that they are so critical in the provisions of goods and services in the different sectors of the economy. They take our agricultural products, they take our fishing products. If you go to Pick n Pay, to ShopRite, there are all those products. So if an economy like Namibia, you don't have a retail company in which Namibians participate, it does not help. So it's important that we also participate in that economy. And Namibians must also then participate in the ownership, in the management of our different sectors of the economy. Ownership is very important. Because if I own a company, as I do, and one minister of finance come up with policy that destroy my value, I say, no, minister, this is not good. And the minister will not say, I'm not patriotic, because we are equal Namibians. So when we own, we also get interest in the economy. The reason some of the unions and workers demonstrate is that they are only used as workers. They have no ownership. And therefore, those countries that have gone far to give ownership to their workers, they created that to protect that business. So it's important that Namibian people have ownership in the economy so that they feel part of that throughout the value chain. Unfortunately, our government, I put it that there's been hide and seek to try and bring policies for Namibian ownership. And because we are so indecisive, we come up with BE, NEF, and so on, and we don't even know what it is. So I think it's time that we take a policy that brings Namibians in the economy. So, in order to avoid corruption, it must also be wholly owned, that the business sector and the other stakeholders participate in the drawing up, in the review of those economy, so that we don't depend on, on few people. I said local content is not an end in itself. It's a means to an end. We want local content to create an equitable society so that that issue of inequality, we deal with it. We want local content to create wealth. Poverty is a problem. If you are poor, nobody listens to you. If you go to the United Nations in the General Assembly, poor countries, when they make their statement, people walk out of the hall. What's that to offer? So therefore, it's important to create wealth for our people, for our state. It brings pride and dignity. It's also important that we don't create a society that's only dominated by politicians. As somebody told me that, unfortunately, so there was a question by the presidents asking Ghana, Malaysia, and so on. They all got independence, I think in 1961. But look where Malaysia is and where Ghana is. And somebody asked the former Prime Minister of Malaysia, say, what is wrong with us in Africa? Mahathir said, one of the problems is that in Africa, some of African countries, your economy and society is too much dominated by government and politicians. And when government and politicians doing well, which is rare, things go fine. But when it's doing bad, everything go bad. So we must therefore build a society where there is a, balance, so that when government change, also the society goes on. That's what we want. We must also create middle class and industrialist. Middle class is the population in the society that have a stakeholder, that employ people, that create wealth. You need to have that. And industrialists are people that will own industries, be their chemical industry, be their mines. People, Namibians, as our Angolan comrade said, that will go and buy mines in Congo or go to invest in Norway and bring money back here to our country. That's what we want to build. Of course, doing so, to have a good local content, is to bring a good socioeconomic stability that also brings political stability. I thank you.
I'm not sure if he's in the room. I'd like to call on my other panelist, Mr. Elsevier Gelderblom. Oh, there you are. He'll be representing NEMPORT. He's the executive for Port Authority and Project Management. Testing, okay. Thank you for that insightful presentation, Dr. Liake. Looking at the local content policy, and specifically on our industry, how do you think this policy, even if it, let's say it stays a policy and it's not legislated or becomes an act, how can we use this document to foster economic growth and development in Namibia? Dr. Hangala.
Oh, it's big. I guess the main difference between a policy and the legislation is that I don't need necessarily, as an operator, to adhere to the policy. There's no legal obligation. So, to me, therefore, having a policy only is not enough. We should move towards legislation. It gives a legal obligation. You can follow up. And the good thing here is that when you have a law, you have independent bodies like courts that will follow up. So therefore, to me, there's no question about it. We must move towards legislation.
And just leading on to that, would you like to add?
Yes,
please,
yes.
Please proceed.
Thank you, thank you. And firstly, I'd like to thank Dr. Angala for the very passionate presentation. I can see that there's passion in that. Yeah, I do think that in the absence of legislation, through the arms of government, the policy can be enforced already. Government institutions, fully owned, are compelled to implement government policy, even without legislation. So that is already something that can be done immediately. We don't have to necessarily wait for legislation, but also various existing legislations, they allow for ministers to make regulations, additional regulations. That's a quicker process than creating a new legislation. So I do think there is already existing tools at our door that we can use for that.
No, thank you. And in what ways do you believe collaboration and coordination among stakeholders can be enhanced to maximize socioeconomic benefits of local content initiatives? Dr. Liake Hangala just mentioned in his presentation, we need to be looking at a more diversified economy, looking at your logistics, infrastructure. Mr. Elsevier, how can we then collaborate between the various industries?
Okay, maybe before I answer the question, I just like to say a few things about Namport. I also noticed there was a few comments made about Namport in the presentations of yesterday. So we are basically an arm of government. We are fully owned at the Port Authority, fully owned by government. And as I said, we have the benefit of adopting policies made by government. And the Namport, through the two ports of Walvis Bay and Lüderitz, we have been supporting the oil exploration activities offshore our coastline for more than 20 years. It's not new to us. It's been happening for more than 20 years, and especially here in Lüderitz. And very importantly, we have been implementing local content requirements for all this time through our own internal policies. And we also, just as I think most of the speakers have alluded to, we stand on 4 pillars. One is ownership, as Dr. Angala has also emphasized. We believe that must come through. Local ownership, Namibian ownership. Namibians actually involved in the management and operations. So ownership itself is not sufficient. We must have our people involved in the actual operations itself. And then obviously, as was exhaustively mentioned, the actual local employment of our people, and then skills transfer. And then finally, through, as we see that 80% or more is the benefit of supplying whatever is needed in the industry, we enforce a local expenditure. We believe there must be local spend. And regarding capacity in our ports, there's been some mention of capacity constraints. Yes, we are, traditionally the port of Lüderitz has been the smaller port. The port of Walvis Bay, as you all probably know, is our bigger port. But we do have very concrete plans in place to expand the port of Lüderitz. I hear there is a port tour planned. So when you go into the port, you'll actually see that it's very congested currently. And the port does not just focus on one activity, it's a multi-purpose port. So we've got plans in place to expand both the port of Lüderitz in the short term and the port of Walvis Bay in the more medium to longer term. And this is specifically also, not exclusively, but also to create capacity for oil and gas, specifically for logistics hubs that must be inside the port. The ports is the physical link between Namibia and the offshore oil activities, the exploration, the development, and eventually the production. So I mentioned both our ports. We are setting them up as energy hubs. And this energy is not just fossil-based energy, but also green energy, like the green hydrogen, as we saw in the presentations. And we believe that, and this speaks to your question, we believe that there is a role to play by government, national government, local government, the arms of government like Namport, Namcor, certain of the aspects in the industry, certain core infrastructure, we believe must be created and controlled by either government or the arms of the state. And that's the only way. It also speaks to the gentleman from Angola's presentation as to the assets. Certain assets must be controlled by the state. Otherwise, you do not get benefit from them. So as a port authority, that's our belief. We will create certain assets. But very crucially, there is a huge playing field for the private sector. And this is where local content comes into play. So we as Namport, we will open, or we are opening up to the private sector, specifically in oil and gas. And yeah, watch out for tenders coming out in the later part of this year, where we want to establish logistic supply bases, especially here in Lüderitz. But we want private entities to come and play in that space in a big way. So that is how we foresee that the industry can play, at least from Namport's side. We will create that playing field inside the port for the private sector to come into the port and give that logistic services to the oil and gas industry.
And that was a presentation from Namport in one question. We're done with Namport at the moment. I'm kidding. Actually, Mr. Gelderblom, I just wanted you to emphasize on that last part that you just mentioned, the supply and value chain, how it plays a crucial role in supporting the operations of the oil and gas industry. How does the Port Authority collaborate with industry stakeholders to optimize the supply chain and ensure seamless operations while maximizing local content? I know you've just touched on it with the tenders coming out and how you're collaborating, but can you give us some examples in terms of what's been happening, especially since the discovery?
Well, we can only do what's in our control. What's in our control is the IOCs will come to us, either themselves or through their agents, and say, listen, we need a space inside the port for a pipe yard or for a liquid mud plant. You know, the service providers will come to us and say, listen, we need that space to support the drilling activities offshore. And because that's in our control, we then are at liberty to enforce certain local content requirements within those requests. So we send them back and we say, listen, but okay, here's our application form, go fill it out, but take note that there is this local content requirement. And that's really what's within our ambit to control. There is the wider logistics industry that is that we have an influence in, but we don't control that. That's much broader, that deals with the actual supplying of the materials and the services, etc. That I really cannot speak to, but as far as the port goes, yeah, we enforce that in what they require from us.
Yes, I want to say something about the port. I've not been to Rudets for a long time. But when you talk to people outside, they think our port is not ready. They think that, and I hope I'm wrong, they think that they are not ready, we are not planning for that infrastructure, or we don't even know what's in for us. There are also companies that are based in North and South Africa, in manganese, who have problems with Durban port. They don't want to go there. They think it takes a long time, there's corruption. They want to use Luther's as a conduit, particularly to go to West, to America. And they want to put a refinery here. But I hope we are not, because one thing that we must do at this stage, we must be honest to ourselves. We must not try to praise ourselves. We must say, comrades, are we ready? If we are not ready with the ports, with electricity, with railway, we must say so. And sometimes, because it's owned by government, common citizens are afraid to say about that. And provided we do so to improve. But my brother, I have the feeling, and maybe it's a wrong feeling, perception, that we need to do a lot with our harbor here to accommodate what is in for us. And sometimes some people say we are a little bit late in that. So I want to say, I hope I'm wrong.
Would you like to add?
Thank you, Dr. Angala. It's something that we get a lot, yes. I must admit, we get the sentiment a lot that maybe perhaps we're not doing enough in Lutherits, and that we're doing more in Wolfish Bay, and it's not really the case. I can say you're wrong.
Thank you.
We do have plans, and we've been having these plans for a very long time. The last master plan for Lutherits was done in 2010. We have just revised that master plan last year. And a master plan is a 50-year plan of how the port must develop. And such a plan is also, it's focused on a business case, on a scenario-based planning model. You cannot expand your port for something that might come, that have a slight chance of coming to your port. As you might imagine, port infrastructure is very capital intensive. It is huge. We're talking billions of NAM dollars to expand the port, even just slightly. And you cannot do it lightly. It's the chicken and the egg situation in most cases. What you can do, it's one model that's sometimes followed if you have a big financial basis, is that you build and they will come. You invest blindly into the port and then you go look for business afterwards. Now, we cannot follow that model because simply we don't have the financial resources to do that. That used to be the model followed in the South African ports many, many years ago, but not anymore also. Now, the model that you must follow is that you must invest just in time. You also cannot follow the model of waiting until the business gets to your door and then waking up and starting to plan for the investment. That'll be too late, because to invest in port infrastructure takes years. So if we start today, we will only see the benefits in 5 years' time. So it's a balance that you must strike. the manganese that you've mentioned, Dr. Angala, we are investing in capacity for manganese. We've just introduced a second manganese exporter in the port. And we are exporting currently close to 1 million tons of manganese per annum. And we will double that very soon. Oil and gas, as you know, as I've mentioned, we've been accommodating the exploration activities for the last more than 20 years. None of the IOCs has reached FID yet to announce that they will actually enter the development stage. There's only talk of it in the corridors. None of them will make any formal announcements. So when you want to invest, you must do it wisely, such that it's also informed by financials. But I can assure you that for the port of Lüderitz, our plans are in place. We will involve the private sector, but we will involve them through a transparent process, because we feel also that the private sector can also come to the party and carry some of the risk, because there is risk involved. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm glad to see that Namport is actually looking forward.
Namport.
Sorry, not Namport. Namport is looking forward and planning for what's to come once some of the operators have reached FID. Now, looking at the operators, you mentioned the operators' role earlier in your presentation, Dr. Angala. How do you believe operators can effectively balance the commercial interests with their responsibility to promote and implement local content? I know some of them are going out of their way, but how do you see them balancing that, especially in this phase that we're in, and in the long term?
Most of the operators that will come to Namibia, they operate all over the world where local content. They are in Guyana. They are even in regimes where things like taxes are very high. So, so local content to them is not a new thing. Of course, what is important is what we said here, what Maggie said here, predictability, political stability, efficient way of doing things, you know, no corruption, making sure that they're able to bring their skills in the country when they need, that they can repatriate their money profit here, that they can build up good foreign currency reserves. I'm sure if we have these very clear things. Also important is that, as we are doing, we must also involve them to look at those policies. I hope the Minister of Mines and Energy must go to the industry and say, is this practical? And they give their views so that they have ownership. So if what we are saying is what we're going to do, I'm not worried about foreign operators. There are those who try to take shortcut. Most of these companies are listed, so they don't want to take chance. So therefore, we must just make sure that we are ready ourselves.
Oh, thank you. Now let's talk about capacity, and from your end as well, Mr. Geldepom. I know you've just informed us that Namport is managing that quite well. But in terms of bridging the capacity gap, that's often been mentioned, and that's often a challenge in developing countries as well. How can Namibia effectively address this challenge to ensure that local businesses and the workforce are adequately equipped to participate in this industry? Because we are talking about being prepared, and preparedness, we don't have that much time. How is Namport bridging this gap? And then we'll come back to Dr. Hangala to also air his views on that topic.
Is it the softer capacity, like human resources?
It's the expertise, it's your infrastructure. How are you managing in terms of bridging that gap? Because the gap exists, that we know.
Look, in terms of human resources, we see the gap in the industry currently. And as we saw from the presentations, it'll take time for us to get the specialized skills. But eventually we will get there. So currently, sort of the more non-specialized skills, that is filled by our people. That's not a problem. And it will take time to get to the specialized ones. In terms of the actual infrastructure capacity, as I've mentioned, we may not be addressing it fully ourselves. That's why we leave a space for the private sector to come and assist. And we've been approached by various sectors, private entities in that regard, that wants to come and assist us. And we will take that up through a transparent process. So there's ways to address this. It's all a matter of risk at the end of the day. You invest, but then there's risk. So you go to the party that can take that risk. And that's mostly the entities that are more well-informed. They sit with a knowledge that we don't have. So that's how we approach it.
Very good. I think I would have some words to say on the capacity. We must start with our institutions, the NAST of this world, then UNAM of this world, to train and prepare in areas like renewable energy, in oil, in seismic, in geophysics, in geology, at home. We must do so. Meme Penduken is here. She has been a leader of SWAPO. Abroad, every year, SWAPO sends students to study all over the world. Some of us benefit. If we give scholarship, send our people to study all over the world. If you send 1,000 per year, after 5 years, you might have 4,500. You know, Botswana is doing it. So we must also do that. Then, NIMT, if you go around today in any corner of Namibia, and your plumber or whatever goes away, and you call a local plumber, they will say, I come from NIMT. Whether it's NIMT Arandis, NIMT Kitman Soap, or NIMT Chumeb. NIMT was donated by Rusing in 1991. They gave 20 million to build NIMT at Arandis. And the Minister of Education by then, Nas Angola, gave one of the best to manage it. It became very good. It was managed properly. Now we have a lot of NIMT people. So we must start building already for our vocational and technical people. And we must start today, not wait 30 years ago when NIMT was developed. In the Petroleum Act, there is a clause that when you get a license, you pay to a scholarship fund. And Petro Fund is one of the largest now that send people all over. Then we must have, bring obligation to companies like Namport that inherently they must give scholarships to young Namibians, to their workers. By that, so you diversify skills. So we must start. It's not difficult to do, but we must do it. We must do it internally. We must also send people all over the world. We must ask companies that come here, if you have 3 Rio Tinto that build those schools, we could have many more. So we must just start, and we will be able to do it. I think sometimes we talk more than we do.
That's true. I think before I open it up to our crowd, I wanted to, if you could just add a sentence each, looking at strategies or initiatives that can be implemented to empower local businesses and foster their growth within the industry. We had so many masterclasses yesterday where we were informed of the various layers where local content or local businesses, your SMEs, can come in and get involved. And it almost looks like we're all lacking in some area or not. What type of initiatives or strategies, from your experience, that we can implement now to have our people here who are attending to go and do some homework and quickly become prepared to participate in this industry?
Yeah, I think there was a few nice slides up on the screen that I saw yesterday and today that identifies the whole value chain.
Yes.
And I think us as Namibians should look at that carefully and identify the gaps, as was said by the speakers. And just by sitting there, I identified various gaps. And then try to fulfill those gaps, form companies that can look at that and give those services. Just to emphasize again on the vocational training gap, there's definitely a vocational training gap. We all know it. We must change the mindset of vocational training. It used to be a very sought after training field, and the profession has sort of, over the years, I don't know, gotten a negative connotation. And from us at the port, we struggle to find highly skilled artisans, and we compete for them with the mines. And these are some of the highest paid people currently in the profession. Sometimes even paid higher than a qualified engineer, you know. So we need fitters and turners, we need electricians, we need these sort of from the ground up artisans, you know. At least at Namport, we still employ lots of what we call the trainees. Every artisan must have a trainee, because that's how you grow, that's how we train them. And I think government institutions can do more on that, in taking in the trainees from NIMT, for example. But yeah, that's just one of the areas. There are various, and I don't want to jump the gun, but if you look at just that slide as to what is the value chain, identify for yourself what you can specialize in, find a niche, and go for it.
Yeah. Dr. Hangala, before you come in, Mr. Gerlopum just reminded me of something. Looking at the new industry of oil and gas, right? You just said you compete for some of your skills, for people to come to Namport. What we see happening now is that there will be a migration, great migration, from some of the industries going into oil and gas. The competition is going to get tougher. So what are your government agencies, your SOEs, such as Namport, doing to retain those skills? Because it's going to be tough. The industry is probably going to offer higher salaries.
It's something that we don't have an answer for, not a clear-cut answer. We are losing people to green hydrogen industry.
Yes.
To oil and gas, maybe not so much, but we foresee that will come. And it's something that we don't have an answer for. You know, we can only pay so much as a government-owned entity, you know. But yes, no, there are solutions, you know, benefits and things, and job security is something that's being looked at also by sort of more mature workers. You know, the younger workers don't care too much about that, you know, they jump around a lot. So, but it is not an easy question to answer.
Understand. Please proceed.
Thank you. You know, in my view, we must not wait for oil discovery to propel our people in the mainstream economy. It's very difficult in Namibia to be a black businessman and women. Nobody wants you. The whites don't want you. The black people don't want you. The government don't want you. You are on your own. You are on your own. There is no attitude of patriotism that let me buy from him or let me give tender to a Namibian. So I'm really wondering, when we talk about local content in the oil, when will we change to help these people here? So to me, we must start now, supporting our people, you know, with government, with government companies, with institutions, and that attitude of helping. I wonder if you go to China and the Hangala group apply there with Chinese company, I wonder which company the Chinese will take first. That is what it is. So therefore, we cannot wait that we have oil, the attitude of patriotism, of supporting what is yours. And it's very simple in Namibia, because any one of us, if I give you 1 million now, I will see it. I will see it in your village. I will see it in your church. I will see scholarship that you give it to your relatives. So it's important that we support our own people, because it will go through particularly our African family systems. So I think the first thing we need to do, before even we talk about big tender, is the attitude to support our own people. I think it's important. We must do that.
I will be waiting for my 1 million. And with those few words, I think we still have some time before lunch. So we're giving you 15 minutes for some questions from, I see a hand popping up. Mayor Pendekeni couldn't wait. So we have 15 minutes for questions. We'll take them all at once, please. So if we can start with Meme. I saw your hand come up first before I even finished my sentence. I don't know where the mics are.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, and your panelists. Do I need to introduce myself? No, I was introduced already. Thank you. Yes, Dr. Hangala took some of my words from my mouth, really. And it's not surprising, we come from the same background, from childhood, actually. We went to the same secondary school, so he's my schoolmate. Yeah, the issue or issues pertaining to the infrastructural development in our country, the skill development in our country, the skill misplacement in our country, and the attitude amongst ourselves are key issues, I thought, somewhere maybe outside this framework here, could be addressed seriously. NAMPOT is the parastatal of government, might not have the leeway to branch out and send students to various universities and colleges and whatnot. But I think we are also not helping government. If we are just waiting for government to tell us now, here is money to send students to school. Take initiatives yourselves. Take initiatives. Let the government be faced with your own proposals. That is what you want to do, because you have seen gaps in your industry. That's education. Infrastructure, really, I'm seeing the world just open, but we Namibians, I don't know whether it is because of the background we are coming from or what, we are so individualistic, very, very individualistic. And I think since we have identified that as a gap, social scientists must help us to take this mentality out. We are such a small population. We are ever competing with one another. When you open a small business, hundreds of them will mushroom that night just to compete against you. But there are other avenues. So it's a gap that we need to address. Social scientists get in there and get into our mentality to open up and support each other also. Not ever to pull each other down. That syndrome must be addressed. The population that I'm seeing here is young, vibrant, land. They know what they want, they know what they're doing, but I don't want them to get anything from us that is so negative. Our generation is negative, and it must go with that negativity. Yes. Yes. My other point, the last point, and now that you clapped hands, it just flew, it vanished, it flew away. But I've said enough. Thank you.
Hello? Okay. Good day, everyone. I'm Gabriel, an entrepreneur. Mine deal with the issue of globalization versus democratization. In other words, how do we reconcile the democratization interest and the global forces interest? Democratization in the sense that local people demand from their legitimate government to get involved in decision-making processes as far as these resources are concerned. And on the other side, you have global interest. These are your investors and supranational institutions that also demand ownership over these resources because they have invested a lot of money. Now, democratization in the local context, such as ours, is quite interesting and has quite a lot of contradictions, at least as far as my opinion is concerned, because we have a unitary state where decisions are made at the central government. And you have a heterogeneous society where, for example, people in Karas come from a different ethnical group, different value system, compared to, for example, people from Oshana region. And people from, say, Karas would say, therefore, that the resources are coming from Karas region. However, they feel that they are not necessarily involved as much as people from other regions are involved where the resources are not coming from. How do you reconcile those differences? How do you ensure that the local people here in these regions where the resources are from actually gets to take ownership of that process? Because you have a situation, especially with multinational corporations, whereby they have an attitude of making a place great without making the local people great of that particular place. For example, we have mining towns in Namibia. Otavi is one, Arandes is the other, where we have these multinational corporation mines that have been mining for some certain years in these areas, but the towns or the constituencies of those areas still remain poor. Now, the argument of these multinational corporations is that they are paying tax to government, but the government, as I have mentioned, because it's not a federal state, it's a unitary state, therefore make decisions that would benefit people from other towns where those resources are not from. So, the reconciliation of global interest and local interests of the local people? How do we iron out those contradictions? Thank you.
Do we have any more questions? We'll take 2 more, unfortunately. So, yeah, we'll take 2 more because we're running out of time and we need to give our panelists time to respond. There's a lady in the front row here, and then there was somebody in the corner over there. If the questions are brief, we will come back to you, sir. I'm just going according to the hands. Ma'am? Yes.
Okay, thank you. My name is Ntapewa, and I'm leading a local manufacturing company. My question to Mr. Geldenblom from Namport is really, are you leading by example? Meaning that we're talking about local content and we're talking about SMEs or local businesses. How much are you involving local businesses, whether it's in Walfish Bay or in Lüderitz where you are based, and how are you going to pull these companies along to ensure that when these multinationals or when these international guys come on board or when they start production or so, how are you going to show them that this is what Namibians do by, what do the people say? We say what we do. There's a local saying now that people are saying we say what we do. So I want to just share briefly why I'm saying what I'm saying. We manufacture PPEs, and these are items that are consumed by the likes of Namport, but we know that you're still sourcing from outside of the borders while we have capacity in the country. What Dr. Hangala said in terms of being deliberate about supporting local institutions, is it then the example of NIMT was given. We need to have such programs implemented by institutions like Namport where they deliberate. We might not be having the capacity to perhaps produce what you are consuming, but if you are supportive enough, you will enable a lot of these local companies or local SMEs to be ready or get ready by the time the other people come on board. So I just wanted to ask that, are you leading by example or will you be leading by example?
Thank you for that question. Can I have the young, yes, you, sir. That's the last question for now.
Thank you very much for the floor. My name is Bartholomew Chanja, and I operate in fisheries research as well as value addition. I also just wanted to touch on what Dr. Hangala mentioned on the need to establish local content policies for all sectors. See, if you look at the examples or the history of the oil case, you will notice that this case comes from the mismanagement of resources through corrupt practices and the uneven growth across sectors. Just like Ms. Rachel said, that you find yourself in a situation where fishermen leave their nets to join the oil and gas. For Lüderitz example, you will see that our economy is primarily driven by fish, but there is also a lack of value addition in this resource itself. At Namport, you will find that we export tuna whole, you know, when you have graduated marine biologists that can, you know, be accorded these opportunities to add value, you know. Small fishermen here, usually they smoke the fish, but if you are not building industries for these guys to, you know, get money from what they are catching, then they will also abandon this practice and move into the oil and gas, which is not good for food security. So my question here is, does the draft policy on local content in this oil and gas really inspire confidence in value addition, or are we going to have a scenario where we are just exporting the skills? Thank you.
Okay, we're closing the floor now.
Okay.
Would you like to go first?
Okay. I did not know whether I understood the colleague properly, but I want to try, because he is saying, how do we reconcile the local demand and national demand. And for example, he said, people in the South might say, wealth from the South must go to the South. Well, number one, and we talk about democracy, essentially, people don't care who is ruling, provided you meet their needs. You meet their school, you meet their housing, you meet their transport. And that's why in other democracy, they choose who meet those needs. I think the members of the Communist Party of China are not many, but that government is trying to meet the needs of China. There are 1.4 billion people, but there's no hunger there. There might be, but not proportionally to 1.4 billion. So the first thing we need to, when people have poverty, they start complaining a lot. So therefore, what we are trying to do is to try create wealth in a manner that nobody should be left out, so that they don't become individualistic. We try to go to our own camps when we have that problem. That's number one. Number two, I have a feeling, and I can talk freely because I'm retired. I don't get salary. I have a feeling that Namibians also like to complain. You know, people in the world work very hard for their bread. So we want government to give out all kind of gift and benefit. And then when the government don't do so, we blame. So I think the culture of hard working productivity and to earn your bread through hard working is important that we must cultivate. The point three that I want to say, yes, it's very true. If you have a business operating in an area, support the community where you operate. If I'm from Karas and I just see things going to Kunene or Zambezi, and I will start. So essentially, it's important that business support local community in one way or the other. That will also, take things away. The other point, of course, is education. Education is also important, and training and becoming those things. That essentially, we are one Namibia, one nation, and all our behavior must be like that. So that the things of tribalism, of so goes away. It's brought also through poverty. I don't think there is anybody in the South who's saying the benefit coming from oil or that must only go to the people in the South. The Southern people are greater than that. I also don't think there are people in Zambezi who are saying the good land there, the maize that we get, must not come to Ruders. I don't think so. But I think some people, maybe it's just the overwhelming of problems that we have. So I will not concentrate too much on those issues. I will concentrate how we build a nation. And that's also our leadership as leaders, to ensure that we build a nation that's united, that's patriotic, that looks to one Namibia. I think that's what I can comment here on that issue of local and so on. Of course, essentially, people look around themselves. So we expect the people of Lüderitz, the people of Keetmanshoop, the people of Karas here, of course, to benefit. They want providing goods and services. But it does not mean this must be done at the exclusion of other Namibians. I don't think there's a good and proper Namibian who think like that. The question that was also, the last one was, do I think, or do we think that the local content policy is inspiring confidence for value addition? This is not This policy is not for that. This policy is not for refining our oil. It's not for putting up a gas-based power plant. It's not for putting up petrochemical. That's different. This policy is bringing Namibian in the gas and oil industry. And I think the policy stipulated here by Meme Maggie, I think it creates a lot of confidence. So I have no problem with that. Value addition policy are policies that we must take on their own, and we must do so. When our colleague from Trinidad was showing a slide that there's more benefit in value-added product. If you sell refined oil, you get more than crude oil. So yes, I'm sure we will think that way as well, to add value to our natural resources. But this policy of local content, I'm sure, in my view, yes, it inspires and invites confidence.
Thank you, Dr. Angala. If I may just add also to the gentleman on this side's query, and as you commented, and I may not answer it, but I will just also leave you with a question. If some people are of the view that if there are resources in a specific region, then the development and the wealth obtained from those resources must go only to that region. It's a fact that not all regions have got natural resources. So you will end up with some regions staying poor. And as a nation, I don't think that is of benefit to anyone. So just to think about that, wealth distribution should be for Namibians. Resources are here now, but other resources will be found in different regions in the future. So wealth distribution must be looked at holistically. There was a question also regarding, specific to Namport. What are we doing? Are we walking the talk? When it comes to procurement, being state-owned, we are governed completely by the Procurement Act of Namibia. So the lady indicated that I think she manufactures something, but we are not buying from her. I didn't catch what she's manufacturing. But
PPE.
PPE, okay. I can just say that we are limited to the Procurement Act and what is contained in that act. So we follow that to the letter. I'm not aware of the specifics, but that's all I can say. We don't have our own policy in that regard. We are governed by the Public Procurement Act, and we must follow it to the letter. So meaning, issuing of tenders and even the evaluation of such is governed by the Public Procurement Act. So in that regard, I think we are doing what we must, and we are at least following the legislation. And regarding things that are not governed by the Public Procurement Act, there we obviously follow our internal policy, and as I said to you early on in my comments or the presentation that I briefly had, that we are doing as much as we can within those 4 pillars. I think the value addition, I tend to agree, it is not perhaps something that belongs in the local content policy. It's probably a separate policy on its own. That's all I want to comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to my panel. I think just for me to conclude this session, I'd like to just remark on the session and everything that's been discussed, that it's obviously evident that fostering local participation and development within Namibia's petroleum sector is not just a matter of a policy, regardless of the industry, whether it's this one, fishing, any industry, but it's our collective responsibility, shared by all stakeholders, not just key stakeholders, but everyone in this room. We all play a role. And by harnessing our collective expertise, resources, and commitment, we create an enabling environment that empowers all Namibians to contribute meaningfully to the industry's growth while advancing the nation's socio-economic objectives. So my parting words is that we work together, guided by shared vision of prosperity and inclusivity as we navigate the path towards a sustainable and thriving oil and gas industry in Namibia. Thank you all for your valuable contribution. Thank you again, my panelists. And I look forward to seeing the positive impacts of our collective efforts in the days ahead. My name is Rachel Namata-Msiska. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to the panelists. We've got quite a very interesting lunch hour set up here as well. Antilla and NCC have invited over 100 top performing students from Ludritz, and they will be in the auditorium from about 1:30 for a master class there as well. So I think that deserves a round of applause, eh? So basically, there will be a focused presentation in the auditorium for those young people on local content, and I think the vision around that as well. I just want to remind you before we go for the break, for the lunch break, Mr. Riedel, please do make sure that your presentation is submitted, as well as Dr. Issa Omagu from the Nigerian Bank of Industry, just to please just make sure that your presentations are submitted and that we indeed have the correct presentations with us as well. We'll break for lunch now. I see it's about 8 minutes past 1. We'll be back here in the venue 8 minutes past 2 for the second and third sessions. The afternoons are going to be much more shorter as per the program. And of course, we've got the gala dinner lined up for you in the evening. But for now, lunch is being provided for. Of course, we've got the CV restaurant downstairs, as well as a number of offerings in and around Ludritz. It's small enough for you to move around and grab yourself some lunch there as well. On that note, thank you so much once again for listening, and we'll see you at 2:09. Thank you.